Okay, so everyone, I think we are ready to start. Going for English because our speakers are not Portuguese as well. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy it. Say hello to Andrew. Hello, Andrew.
Hi. So yeah, as he said, my name is Andrew. I am an instructor for Angular Bootcamp, and I'm also a software developer from St. Louis, Missouri, USA. And today I'm going to talk about drag and drop with a library called Angular Material CDK. And I'll also introduce Angular a little bit and Material as well. So what I'm going to talk about is first an overview of Angular and Material, look at the drag and drop library, and then I'll show some code and example apps. So what is Angular? So this is a very popular single-page application framework that Google makes. It's open source, and it's a competitor with the popular React framework. It targets mostly the web, so you can build apps for desktop and also mobile. And you can also build native apps for both mobile and desktop using third-party frameworks. So the ones I'm most familiar with personally are Ionic and Electron. And with Electron, you can use that with any JavaScript framework. Basically, when you build a desktop application with Electron, each window is a separate browser. So it's just pure JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And then you can have access to Node APIs if you need to do anything with the file system. One other thing to know about Angular is that it's often abbreviated NG, so you'll probably see lots of things called NG this or NG that, and that sort of is a shorthand for Angular. So material design. This is a design language that Google developed in 2014. This is the design that they use on Android, but now they use it on pretty much all of their applications and devices. They broadly describe material design at material.io. So that's sort of like the very high level explanation of material. Broadly, it's supposed to mimic paper. So the different buttons and dialogues are supposed to be flat, but also have shadows, and things are supposed to animate. They're not supposed to suddenly appear. They're supposed to smoothly change state so that the user isn't startled by things moving suddenly. So because this is just a design language, there's implementations for all different platforms: iOS, Android, the web. So Angular Material, this is the implementation of material design for Angular, and Google developed and maintains the material library. So because it's written for Angular, it exposes all of the components as Angular components. So rather than being like a typical CSS component library, you're not like putting divs in and then attaching classes to them to style those native elements. You're actually using Angular components right in the template, and that makes things really readable and also work really well with Angular. You don't have to fight CSS quite as much. The Angular Material Library exposes each of its parts with separate ng modules. So in Angular, there's a separate module mechanism which handles Angular dependencies. So what that means is that you can bring in just the pieces that you need to your application. And as I said, it looks like material design, so all the theming and styling comes in the box. The upside is that you have very little manual styling that you have to do in a material application. The downside is that it looks like a Google app, but that might not be particularly a bad thing. So the Material CDK, this is the component development kit. This is part of the material library. And they broadly describe it as Angular material without the styles. So the idea is that you could take the CDK and use that to build your own component library if you needed to build something very custom. So if you had like a totally custom look and feel for your company's web apps and you wanted them to look the same, you could build a library with the CDK in theory. The CDK has a lot of really low level functions though. It doesn't like give you a button component that you can just style yourself. It'll give you like tools for handling internationalization if text should be right to left or left to right and things like that. So the idea, I guess, is that you can combine those with your own CSS and Angular components. So a few of the off-the-shelf ones that most people know about are Bootstrap and Clarity. There's hundreds and hundreds of those frameworks. One thing that's in the CDK, though, that is very usable without needing to build a lot of custom things is the drag and drop part of the CDK. And this was just recently added to version 7 of Angular Material. So this is the most recent version. They had an experimental version in version 6. So the Material project has this separate part where they put experimental features that you can use. This was one of them. So it basically gives you a declarative way to build drag and drop. So rather than attaching lots of hooks to components and elements, listening for those events, and then modifying your data, you can declaratively say, this element should be draggable, and here's where it can be dragged to, and everything just works, is the idea. There's a little bit of sorting with an array that you have to do for lists, but it's very minimal. So this is the complete feature list of the drag and drop interface. You can do free drag, where you can just drag an element anywhere on the screen, and when you release the mouse button, or if you're on a mobile device, if you just lift up your finger, then it'll stay in the same place. There's reordering within a list. So if you have like a Trello board or Google Calendar, it's where you just move things around and they rearrange automatically. You can move things between lists. You can handle animations. So the two that come in the box that you can hook into are animating the item moving into place when you lift up on the mouse, or animating the reordering. So, and if it handles touch devices, you can do custom drag handles. This is where you can limit the place where the user has to click to drag to a specific element, and you can do that. Sometimes it's like a little icon that you have to click. Previews is when you are dragging an item. It actually copies that item and makes a new one that is what ends up being under the pointer. So that's what a preview is. It handles placeholders. So when you're actually hovering over a list, it'll put a copy in the list as well and show where it will be if you lift it up on the mouse. It can do vertical and horizontal lists, and you can also lock the movement of a draggable item to one axis. And we'll see all of these features in the example. Before we get too far, I wanted to just show Angular Material in general, since this isn't like a specific, specific Angular audience. We don't all have exposure to Angular Material. So this is kind of like what a Material application can look like with Angular. So all of these pieces are from the Angular Material library. That includes the title bar, the search input field, this list here. These are individual cards that it gives you in the library. And if you click on one of these, they have chips built in. And the title, the placeholder animates automatically. Everything like that. So it looks a lot like an Android application, but in the web. So just to give a sort of preview of what that looks like in the HTML, Angular applications split each component into three files: the CSS HTML and TypeScript live in separate files. In Angular, we use TypeScript rather than JavaScript by default, it's basically JavaScript with types. So this HTML file, pretty much everything is declarative in the HTML for material components. So for example, this first 3 lines fully describes the whole toolbar. We give it a color, described with directive, and then we just have any content that we want in there. Similarly, there's a component for the side nav, so that would be this left-hand side, and it also contains the information here as well, since you can optionally have this animate in and out if you wanted to, like if you moved your mouse to the left. Then there's the actual content for the side nav and the content for this right-hand side. So you can see that we're getting a lot of mileage without very much CSS at all. In fact, the CSS file is this for the whole application, 62 lines. Everything else is handled by the material framework. So, so going back to drag and drop, why do we want to use drag and drop instead of a different library? There are several other drag and drop libraries. Some of them have been out since the beginning of Angular 2. Angular 2 is the first version of what we know as Angular today. There is Angular JS, which is actually a totally different framework. That's also known as Angular 1. So these other libraries implement drag and drop. The main reason to use the CDK feature is that it's first-party support. So that means that in general it has the support of the Angular material team at Google, and bugs are fixed pretty rapidly. When I first started using the drag and drop in our application, that was last summer as the experimental feature from version 6. And I found a bug with it where if you dragged an item out of a list and it was the only item and you moved it back, then the internal state of the drag and drop feature was broken. So I opened an issue on GitHub describing it. They elevated it within an hour to like the second highest level, and then within 2 days they fixed it and released a new version. So I was really surprised by that kind of response for an experimental feature even. So the basic way to use CDK drag and drop is to add what's called a directive. So in Angular, you can define your own elements. So you can give them any name that you want. So that's why in the HTML we had those like non-standard HTML tags. And then Angular also has what's called directives, which basically attach a TypeScript or JavaScript class to an element. So this will attach the CDK drag class from the material library onto this element and make it draggable. So I'll just go ahead and describe how to get going with it. You just need to install the CDK. So even though it's part of the material project, it's its own library. And that means that you can actually use it without bringing in material at all into your project. Then you need to import the drag and drop module from it. And then you need to add the directive to an element in your application. So I'll just quickly show what that looks like. I'm going to use Stackblitz. This is a online IDE that's very handy for prototyping things. It originally just supported Angular, but now it has support for all kinds of things, including React and Ionic. It uses code, I believe, from VS Code, so it looks a lot like VS Code in the browser. And so this is a default application that it builds for you, where we have 2 components. The top level component is usually called app component. So the first thing I'm going to do here is install the CDK. So I'll just type in here. This is like doing an npm install. So at Angular/CDK. If I have a slash, there we go, up there. I'm not used to this keyboard, sorry. There we go. All right, and then once that's installed, I can just go into the module. So again, Angular applications have their own dependency management system. So I can just import drag and drop module, drag, drop module. And I need to import that file. Oh, okay. All right, that's a good idea. This is sorry about this. There we go. Oh my. There we go. Ah. Okay. So once I import the module, I can go to here to the HTML and do CDK drag, save that. Now I should be able to drag that. So that makes that free dragging element. And that's all you have to do to get going with the feature. I also point out that I can go ahead and put that on any element. Oops. And save that. Now if I try to drag that, I can't drag it. And at first I might think, well, I might need to do something special for certain kinds of elements. But what's happening here, if I inspect the DOM, we'll see that when I hover over the hello component, it's not actually taking up any space in the DOM. So by default, that's the default CSS for Angular components. So when I try to drag this, I'm actually clicking on the H1 block and not the hello component. So you can fix that by making display block on your element, would be one way to do that. So if I go in the CSS and just say hello to get the hello component, oh no. All right, let's copy this whole thing. All right, save that. Now I can move it because it actually takes up space then. So that is the easy way to get going with it. I have a more in-depth example, not live coding. This is what some people call a playground that just lets you experiment with an API and see how all the different features work. With the basic usage where you just put CDK drag on an element, we already saw this one where you can drag anywhere. The idea here is I'm showing what attributes I'm putting on the element. And so here I'm locking the axis using the lock axis attribute. Same with the Y. And of course I can put a drag handle where I can't click on any place in the item. I have to click on the handle itself to drag it. There's also the ability to do lists, as I mentioned. So in order to do that, the easiest way is to have a parent component with this directive applied to it, CDK drop list group, and that will connect any CDK drop lists that exist and its children together. And that means that you can drag items between them. So each one of these has CDK drop list applied. You can input the array of data that represents the items. So I have 2 arrays. And then so in Angular, this is how you do component inputs. You put right in the template. And to have outputs, you can do this kind of syntax. And this will call this Typescript function whenever a list item is dropped. And so the reason this is needed is to update the ordering in the array. So if I actually drag an item, I can move it to the other list. And once I release the mouse, it will actually move the item from this list to the other one. And that's because of the drop event. Similarly, if I reorder the items, then they update when I release, and that's the same thing. Most of the directives have a disabled property, so if I set that to true, then I can't drag anything. They just become regular elements again. So that's another part of the API. Another thing it lets you do pretty conveniently is it automatically applies classes to the different elements, and then you can define your own styles for them so that they appear differently while you're doing things with the list. So by default, it will add the CDK drag class to each of the drag items and CDK drop list to the lists. And if I start to drag one, it will automatically update these classes for the different components. So the preview I've used to style with the light red or paint color, and then we have a placeholder for the item where it started. If I hover over a new list, it will update the classes to reflect which list I'm going to drop it in, and that would be the CDK drop list dragging class. So that's a really convenient way to hook in and style the different components. There's another feature, this one they added to the full version in version 7. You can define predicate functions that will be run against each item if you try to drag it to another list. And this lets you define logic that would prevent you from being able to drag certain items into certain lists. So in this case, I can only drag the 2 element back into here, so I can't move the 1 element back. If I move this over here, though, I can move this back. That's because I've defined this 2 predicates, which the predicate function gets the actual element, and then I can use that to check its value. So this was a pretty convenient thing they added. It used to be that the only way to connect drop lists together was to actually define all of the other drop lists, like to pass in an array of all of the drop lists that you want it to be connected to. So you had to do all of your own wiring. But now you can use these more convenient features. The drop lists have a ton of other things as well. This is basically the full API for drop lists. So we have different events that happen when I drag. So if I drag, if I drop an item, then the drop event happens. In this case, I don't have a parent container, so I need to actually connect it to the other list before I can drag. Before I can drag an item. So now I can move it into the other list. I can change, again, the orientation can be horizontal. The material library, CDK drag library, doesn't change the CSS to make the list horizontal. You have to apply something like display flex to make it arrange things horizontally. So you're basically telling CDK that that's how your CSS is configured. It's not going to actually change the orientation for you. Then of course you can disable them. And then there's these other events. So whenever I whenever I enter, I get the entered event firing. If I exit, I get that. If I actually sort these items, I can get that as well. And each one of those gives data about the event that you can hook into. So you can pretty much do almost anything you want to do with dragging items. There's the API for drag items as well, and those have even more events that you can listen to. So if you had to do things at the item level, you could do that. The last thing I wanted to show was an example application built with the drag library. So this is like a calendar. If I click, I can start typing a message. So then I can drag this item, and I've hooked into the CSS classes that are applied to make the item offset a little bit when I'm dragging it, and also to set the opacity of the preview item. And I'm doing this with Clarity, so I'm using the CSS library for that. So I'm just to show that you can not use material, you can use it with any kind of CSS component library you want. And that's where this drop-down menu, for example, comes from Clarity. And then if I enter anything else, then that appears as well. So this, the code for this is on GitHub. So I have the code on the GitHub here. I might show a little bit of this code just to show what that looks like. So again, we have a typical Angular CLI application where you have a top-level app component. And in this case, it just has one element, the calendar. So if I go in the calendar and I look at the HTML, if we can make that bigger. So I have a table. I wouldn't normally use a table for doing layouts, but I wanted the styling of a table from Clarity, so I'm using that here. In general, I would not use a table. But here I've applied the Droplist group directive to make all of the lists connected to each other. Then I can iterate over each week. So that's what ng4 does for me. This is an array of weeks. And then I can also inside there iterate over each day of the week. And then put a drop list. So each of the cells in the table is a drop list, and I have a three-dimensional array holding all the state for each day, so that would be each of the entries stored in there. And then I have my own component for the entries. That would be these guys, and those have the CDK drag directive. And it used to be that you had to specify where the user could click. So I have both of them applied, but now you only need one. I'm iterating over these states to get a new component for each entry in that array. So that if I had more than one item in the list, then that would be another item in that array. So that is where that's what this state here is. If I go into an item by clicking it, I can delete all the text, and then the item goes away. That occurs because I have a custom event coming from the component that causes that entry in the array to be deleted. So if you want to look at the rest of this, again, that's on GitHub. The running version is also up there, so that's from the GitHub IO link. But it's all linked to in the Playground application, so that would probably be the best place to start. All right, so that's all I have to say. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Question?
If you want to have a list and have a place where you want to drop it, an element from that list, only that place, can you do that with that framework?
You're saying a specific item, you can only drag that to a specific list?
No, we have a list, and you have another element that's not a list. And you want to drop it, an element from one list from that to that specific element. And can you do that?
I mean, you'd probably have to make that item a list as well, even though you don't want it to be one, because you have to have a place for it to be dropped into. Yeah. But you can like define some custom logic so that you can only put like one thing at a time in that list, for example, and then it would just be one item. But you probably have to build it from drop lists, though.
No more questions? I have one. The element that you have on the calendar, you have the drag handle. Why is that needed? Because the drag would do the trick only, right?
Right, yes. So they used to, in version 6 of the experimental version, I can't find the code, but they used to require you to specify exactly what you had to click on to drag an item. So you had to have both CDK drag and CDK drag handle. And
right now, the handle you only put on the thing you really want to be draggable.
If you don't have a CDK drag handle directive, the whole thing is draggable. So, yep.
Okay, this was great. No more questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now we have Sani to talk to us about reactive forms. Let's hear it.
Right. Hello, everybody. Bon dia. Bon what? Bon noite. Okay. I'm learning. Hi. So I'm going to be talking about forms. This talk has 1,001 different titles, but we can build a form around it, right? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Sani Yusuf, I'm a GDE in Angular, and I'm also an Angular bootcamp instructor. In fact, that's what we came to Portugal to do, to impact some knowledge to. I've been building the UI school, but we can forget about this for now. Yeah. Has anyone seen the movie Avatar?
Yeah.
Which one? The blue people? That one. That's the best movie of all time. If you do not believe that's the best movie of all time, then we're not going to be friends. It's the single best thing that's ever been made. If you need to find me online, I'm at Sani Yusuf pretty much like everywhere. So yeah, pretty easy to find. So let's talk about forms. I always start by saying forms have the ability to make or break your business, right? A lot of people don't think of this, but this here, is the most profitable form in the world. Do you know how much this form is worth? 400 billion plus. Well, last time I checked, I think it was like 600 billion, right? This tiny form is responsible for almost 90% of everything Google makes. This guy here. But you don't think about it as a form, do you? Every single day of your life, you actually use a form. Can anybody think of a day where they didn't use a form? Or if you haven't used the form today? Okay, good. We have people that say the truth. What about these guys? We all use these guys, right? Anybody recognize this? What's that? Exactly. This is a form. This is the form. You take this out, there is no business. You take this out, there is no business. Because if people cannot tweet, then there's no data. If there's no data, then there's no business. If people cannot tell you that they're about to take a shower, on Facebook, then you don't have any business as well. So the sole purpose of these companies is to make this as simple to use as possible, right? If you look at your mobile phone, the keypad, that is a form. Your browser, the URL bar, that is a form. Your ATM machine, that's a form, right? Every single day of our lives we use form, and they're very critical. When they work, we don't think of them as forms. But when they don't work, like when you want to fill your taxes, or maybe you go on one of those websites that you want to sign up, you remember that it's a form. So the way I'm going to structure this talk, we're going to start by seeing some terrible forms, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to it. And everything I show you has a link to a demo. So can anybody recognize a form like this? You've just gone to a website, www.something.com. You haven't touched anything, and it's already complaining, right? It's telling you, put everything, give me your information, right? Like, this is not creepy. Exactly. So what I say is, you should let a user make a mistake first before you tell them, that they're making a mistake. Let me try to enter the actual first name first. Like, I've just landed on your web page. Like, give me some time, right? So the second one is here, this one, where you can see the submit button here is enabled, right? But the form needs these information. So why should I be able to click the submit button in the first place, right? Because if I click this, what's gonna happen? It's gonna go to the server and come back with what? An error. So I shouldn't be able to click this submit button until I have fulfilled what the form is asking me to do, right? It's like Twitter. If you don't type anything, the tweet button doesn't show up. This is another one where I've come on this form and I'm trying to enter my last name, but it's complaining about my first name, password, and email address. It's not focusing on what I'm doing, right? And this is very common. This is actually very common. So I'm trying to give it my information, but it's telling me that you're not giving me your information the way the page is loaded. So it's like, do you want my information or not? And this is a very common one. So it's very important that a form has the capability of knowing when a user is actually interacting with a specific field and not interacting with that, so that the form can react, right? And this is another one. Nobody likes this one. This one, most people, you just see it, you just zone out. When you go on the form page and you see like it's very long, it's like 3 pages, and you're like, I don't want to do this now. And most of them is like you have to fill it at once, right? If you don't fill it at once, it doesn't work. Then this is a common one that frustrates a lot of people. You come, you're about to enter the username, password, everything, and then you click and it tells you, oh, the username is taken, but also everything is blank again. So you have to start again. It's a very, very common one, right? What would be nice is when I put this name, I should be able to know that, okay, this username is available or is not available, right? So this is my reaction to this. There's supposed to be an animation here, but there isn't. So how can we create better forms with Angular? First of all, hands up if you use Angular in your company. Anyone? Okay, good stuff. Hands up if you don't use Angular. Hands up if you create forms, but you don't use Angular. Okay, good stuff. So we can introduce ourselves to Reactive Forms. And what is Reactive Forms? This is actually my favorite feature of Angular. It's the feature that allows you to create, like, how do I say? It allows you to create really, really robust forms. So there are a couple of features about, the first one is to observe. Forms need to give you the ability to observe. Good forms allow you to observe. What do you mean by observe? They allow you, the developer, an API to know when the user is changing the value, what the current value is, as the value is changing. So as the user is interacting with this form, the developer has that ability, right? The second one is empathy. A great way to use a form is empathy, because forms actually have direct correlation with anxiety levels. So if a form is very long or it's very tedious to fill, it directly relates to your anxiety levels. Has anybody ever done this where you go on a web page and you're trying to fill a form on your mobile phone and it's terrible and you just like, you're not going to do it. You're just going to wait till you get home. Maybe you're trying to order something online and maybe like the web page is not mobile optimized and you're just like, nah, I'm just wait. I think we've all seen that at some point, right? Composability and also extendability. The ability to create and compose different features, right? So first of all, we're going to talk about the building blocks of reactive forms, right? So the whole Angular reactive forms starts with something called the abstract control. This is the base class, the base level. And from that abstract control, we have a feature called form control, form group, and form array. And they all inherit from the abstract control. So everything in Angular reactive forms is an abstract control at its basic level. But the form control does have some extra things that it adds on top. The form group also has some extra things it adds on top, and so with the form array. So to use reactive forms, you just need to make sure you import the reactive forms module into your code base, right? This is the beginning. And let's start with the form control. The form control is when you need to bind to individual elements, right? So you can, and it also works via the form control property. So you would use something called the form control here, and you instantiate a new instance, and it has some parameters that you can pass, which we can talk about when we look at the demo. And then you bind to something called the form control property, which is a property or directive that is made available by the reactive forms module. And then you just pass that instance there. So you associate one input field with the form control. All good? Okay. Then the second one is a form group. So the form group is mostly when you have like a bunch of input elements that you want to use, most likely a form, right? And you have like first name, last name, username, a bunch of things that they all relate together, and you want to correlate them or aggregate them. So it's used to aggregate group of controls. But the form group doesn't just aggregate a group of form controls. It aggregates a group of abstract controls. So one of the children of the form group could also be another form group, or a form array, or a form control, right? So it gives you abilities like you can have like, if you have like 5 different pages, right? You can have a form group for each page and have one form group that aggregates all of them as children, which is really, really cool. So it provides you object-based API, so you treat it like an object. So this is what a form group looks like. You would create a form group here, and you'd have like first name, this could be another form control, but nothing stops this from being another abstract control, so it could be like a form group as well again, or another form array, and then you'd use the form group object and pass the instance, and then you use the form control name to associate each individual element. So you can say first name is this, last name is this guy, and email like that. You associate them within the context of the form group, right? Now the third one is a form array. It's very similar to the form group. However, it gives you an array-like syntax. So the form group is a group-like, an object types-like syntax, while the form array is an array-like syntax. So if you want to use like indexes and all of that, it's the same thing, but it just gives you an array-like syntax, right? I've shown you the imperative approach, but you can also use something we call the form builder to make a more nice way to create a form group. So this is a form group I'm creating now, and I'm using the form builder here. This is like the imperative approach. Oh, sorry, declarative approach. I've made a mistake. This shouldn't be this. This should be with the form builder, so my mistake. But anyways, I'm going to show it to you in the demo. Who wants to see the demo? So apparently I'm the only black Viking that exists in the world. Ragnar Lothbrok. Anybody watch Vikings, the show? Yeah. Bjorn Ironside. Oh, maybe I like Ivor. Actually, no, I don't like Ivor. All right, so we're going to go to my stack blitz here. Okay, in the Portuguese keyboard, where is the slash? Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, how do you do at? Okay. I'm struggling here. Oh, okay. I think I got it. I think it's option 2. Yay!
You got it.
Wow. This is it's very different. So, the first thing I want to show you is 1 second. Is a Twitter form control here, all right? So let me probably get a little chair here so that I can sit and show you the demo here. All right. So let's open this in a new window, and this is all open source, so it's available on my Stacklet. And this is basically like I just recreated what a Twitter what's it called would look like, input form. So you can see here the tweet is disabled. It's telling me how many characters I have left. And right now it's giving me a bunch of states, right? You can see there's a bunch of states in there. Untouched, invalid, and pristine. Can anybody guess what untouched means?
Input field is empty.
Yes, but extra, yes?
Was never clicked. The element was never clicked.
Yes, but not only clicked. Untouched means it hasn't been focused, like clicked and then lost focus. Because it's only touched when the focus has been lost. So you can see I focused it, but it's still untouched, right? Until I leave, then it becomes touched, right?
That's when you said yeah.
So again, yes, yes. It's like if I have like a food, like a pie, and I say, don't touch my pie, right? If I put my hand on the pie, you know, I have technically, you know, I have touched, but until I leave and like, you come back and you see my fingerprint, oh, okay, who touched my pie, right? Exactly. So invalid is basically if you put a bunch of what we call validators, which I will show you, it shows you if the validators do not pass, then it's invalid. Pristine is if the initial value has not changed, right? Once you change the initial value once, even though you come back and set the same initial value, it's what we call dirty. It's now dirty. That's the name of the state. So no matter, even if I come back, it always is dirty, right? It's always going to be dirty, right? Then valid, you can see now that when I put something, that it's now valid. So let's go ahead and see the code. Can everybody see, or do you need the font size higher? Bigger? Bigger? That's fine? Okay. So we can see the control here. So let's first look at the Typescript. Here what we're doing is we have the form control, which we created a new form control here. The first parameter that we pass is the initial value. For this one is empty. The second parameter is a validator or an array of validators. So Angular has some built-in validators. Here we're using the required validator, which means it has to have a value for it to be valid. But you can also have multiple validators, so you can cascade multiple of them. And you can also have custom validators, which we will see, right? And the control has something called the value changes property, which is an observable that gives you, like, anytime the value changes, the observable emits a new value. So here, you can see here, whenever the value is changing, I'm getting the length of the value, and I'm doing minus 280, because that's 280 is the Twitter count character, right, for Twitter. So I'm just getting the current value minus 280 and just setting that. That's really what all I'm doing there. Make sense? Okay. And let's look at the HTML. I just have a bunch of states there: untouched, touch, valid, invalid, pristine. And depending on, one thing you can do is you can just say if it's untouched, you know, with ng if, then it goes away. So you have those states there. And here we're just binding that observable there. Any questions? And here we're actually just binding the form control itself to the Twitter control. Any questions about this? Okay, so let's go ahead and see the second example I want to show you, which is this guy. So we already know that the form group allows us the ability to add individual controls, right? However, what happens when, let's actually, before we actually see this, so here, we have a bunch of states, right? Let's actually go back to the code a little bit and see what is happening here. So we have like 3 controls that we've created, right? We're using the form builder. So this is how you use the form builder. You have the form builder. You can call .group, .array for form array, .group for form group, and .control for form control. So normally when you're creating form control, you don't need the form builder because form control is very simple. But when you need a form group, you can use this declarative approach, right? Now, you can see that the first parameter is the object of key value pairs for our controls. Email, what do you think for email to be valid? What do you think needs to happen? Say that again? Yes, it needs to have that @ symbol, exactly. Because for email to be valid, it doesn't actually need to have something. Something at is good enough. Something at something is good enough. That's what the email specification states that, but which is why you should probably not be using the built-in email validator, because most emails in today have something.com, so you'd probably want to use something like a regex validator. There's a pattern validator that would match that regex, right? So for it to be valid, it has to be required and match the email specification. For a password, it's just required. For confirm password, is required, but there's a problem here. I just need a password to be required, right? So if I put A in the password, it's valid, right? But what if I put B in confirm password? It's valid, but should we allow the user to... Exactly. So this is where that second parameter here, we have validator password now, which is what we call a custom validator. And what we're doing in that custom validator there is we're actually putting that function, and the function would inject the instance of the form group, and then we can check and say if the password and confirm password do not match, right? Then actually return an error. So you normally return null if everything is okay. Then you return an error if everything is like something is wrong. So it's a flip boolean. Like if something is wrong, then you return an error message. You don't actually need to explicitly return null or undefined. Normally, just returning the error is fine. So that's kind of how it works. So let's see how that ties in with the HTML. So first of all, let's play around with this here. So Sani, and you can see now, you can see the states here, right? Sani is still untouched, right? Why is it untouched? Anyone? Yeah, you haven't lost focus, but you can see it's dirty already. Why is it dirty? Yeah, we changed the initial value, right? Exactly. So Sani at Sani. So it's actually valid. This is actually a valid email based on email switch, but we would go and say .com, right? So in the password, if I put PASS and I put SAPP, these two, you can see they're both valid because their validator says just required. However, you can see we can use the passwords don't match, and we will see how we wire that up. But as soon as I put PASS there, then the form becomes valid. So let's see the code for this. So if you look at that, what we've done here is we've bound, all these things. But if you look here on line in the end here, what we've done here is we said, hey, get the error called password match, which is the name of the error we're returning from our custom validator, right? And get password if the make sure first of all the password itself has been touched, right? And the confirmed password has also been touched, because you don't want to evaluate if somebody has not touched the fields, because then as soon as they land on your page, they say, oh, or if like I type only one of them, like password, and I haven't entered the confirmed password, you don't want to start evaluating when the person has not. So you have to, that's where the empathy comes in. If I'm entering my password and you're telling me the passwords don't match, I'm like, give me a few minutes, let me type. That's the empathy. Because a lot of people, when they look at that, it's like they don't know what they're doing wrong. So you let the user, give them some time. And that's when they see this passwords don't match, only when this error is not available. Sorry, is true. And then disabled, we can just say if the group is invalid, you disable the button. So you see how we can set the rules and just let Angular worry about how to display what. Another thing I haven't actually talked about is every time in each individual field, what happens is a class get added. So if it's a field is invalid, ng invalid CSS class gets added. So you can use CSS to even hook in behaviors. You can tie into CSS classes as well to have behaviors, specific and styling behaviors. Any questions so far?
I have one.
Yes, please.
These states, these invalid states,
Yes.
it's n conjunct. It works in an n conjunction to all the other states in a specific group. For instance, we have an email, we have a password, and a second password confirmation. If the state of the email is invalid, it, for instance, cascades with the state of the password. If the email is invalid, does it cascade with the state of the password?
No, no. Each control is the only cascading that happens is on the group level.
All right, but if every groups are stacked, if every elements are stacked in the same group, does that correlate to each other, or how can we implement some logic to validate or to require that every state is valid for the form to be able to be submitted?
So that's the default state. The default way it behaves is when you group elements, the group is only valid if all individual elements are valid. So which is why I talked about this case. For example, in this case, you can see how if we put another password, so I put PASS here, if I put AABB, technically they're all valid, right? And but this is not what we want. We can even go further and say, actually, we want to make sure these two fields are also the same. Then we can put the validator on the group level now. And that's what we've done here. But if email is worried only about email, password is worried about itself, each individual worries about itself. If you need a behavior like this, then you go to the group level. Yeah, no problem. So this, you see how now, if you have like 5 different groups, you can group all of them together, and you don't need to know what is what. You can just say, is it valid?
Yeah.
And that yes would only happen, that would only be true if
every groups are valid.
Exactly. So you don't need to check who. But if you want to go down and even check who has a problem, you can say check which error. If something's wrong, who has a problem? Just give me all the errors. Which control is giving me the error? Why? You know, which particular validator is failing? It's really, really composable. Any questions about this? Okay. So let's see the final one. You know, the funny thing with the final one is I did not have time because I had a long day of teaching today, and I actually taught this today. I have one of my students here in class in the audience. But we can actually live code the edit of this, because the way this works is the async validators, in terms of what if I want to validate a field, but I need to make some call to the server or maybe some asynchronous request, right? I need to do that, like username. If you're giving me a username value, I want to check my server. Some people, what they do is they check the server and they lock that username for maybe like a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes. So that if you're trying to use the username man's not hot, and I'm trying to use the username man's not hot, like 10 seconds after you, because you came first, what some servers do is they lock it for like 2 minutes. They give you 2 minutes to finish that form, right? Then if I try tomorrow, then that's it, which is very smart. But if I need to do that, for example, I need to check the server just to see, is this username available, right? That will really be cool, isn't it? It will really be cool. That's where the custom async validators are. They just like the custom validators, but they allow you to make asynchronous requests. So the way I actually built this is, this particular code is, I built it in a way where it allows you to, how do you say, to put a postcode of somewhere. Like the way I made this is like, if you don't live in California, I don't deliver to you. Because you know that everybody in California has money, right? So I'm like, if you don't live in California, I'm sorry, I don't deliver to you. But think about it, if you have a website and maybe you started in California, you only deliver in California, right? Let's say you made like a new like food delivery, right? And you only deliver to California. You don't want the person to put their postcode and they live in New York, and then it's until they place their order that you figure out, oh, by the way, we cannot deliver to you. You want them to like, hey, just give me your postcode now. If you don't live in the area I deliver, then there's no point. This is how Uber Eats works, right? It's like there's no point showing you, because it's never going to be useful to you. So here, if we put like something like 90210. We all know this one. What happens is, oh, sorry, not here. 90210. A real request is being sent, right? And if we put like 10021, it tells you like we don't deliver to you because you haven't got money. But I know we're running out of time quickly, but what I'm going to do is while I show you this, is we can actually change the API I'm using to match the one in Portugal. Why don't we do that live and see that if you don't live in Portugal, then we don't deliver to you. Can we do that? Yeah, we got some cook. So the first thing I'm going to do is okay. Yes, so the API I'm using here is something called Zippopotamus, right? Is zippopotam.us. And it allows you to pass things and it returns state name, things like that, right? So here you can see what we've done is we don't really care about these guys. This is the one we're looking at, right? Here you can see what we have here is first parameter is initial value. Second parameter is a validator or array of validators. Third parameter is a custom async validator or an array of async validators. Well, we just need one, so we just have one. And it's literally just a function, just like the other one. But this function, you can give it a dependencies. So like this is going to need HTML. So you provide the dependencies from the outside. Then you return a function that gets form control injected into it, right? And then you return either an observable or promise of an error message or null. Does that make sense? So here we can see that it's using Zippopotamus, but I actually checked Zippopotamus. I can't even spell that. Zippopotam. Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you, Google. They're listening to us. I knew it. We can have countries, and voila, we learned this today. Portugal is one, and it tells you how to use it. You just put I think this is how your postcode system is, right? 4-3, right? So let's go ahead and change this to Portugal live while we watch this. So we're gonna say Zippopotamus. So we need to go to /pt, right? So /pt, and then it allows us to enter this. So let's do this first of all. Let's trial this, right? And so it has one of the properties it returns is country, then places, right? And it has place name and state. What's the name of this state? Porto. Okay, so can somebody give me a Porto postcode? 4200 dash 001. Okay, yeah, Porto, exactly. State is Porto. So what we're looking for here, let's try to do this. So is if not state name, so places and position 0 does state. Oh, okay, so it's the same format, right? It looks like the same format. Places is an array, right? And it's an array. The first member of that array is an object which we can then get the state property, right? Okay, so we can just copy this here and say if it's not equal to Porto, right? If it's equal to Porto, then yes, right? Okay, so we can try the first one, which is 1001, right? Let's go here and we type in the zip code here, 1001. Wait, 100. What is it? 1000 dash. Oh, sorry. How do you do dash? It should. Oh yeah, that's a good question actually. Yeah, yeah, because America. Oh yeah. So we need to change this to input type. Where is it? What line number? Anybody? This one? So we can just change it to text for now, right? Look at us, we're live coding. and we can say 1000 dash 001, right? Oh, I have the max length validator. Where is that? Max length 5. So let's just 10, something. Right. I like this. Everybody's paying attention. 100 dash 001. So of course, this is what we expect, right? For it not to work. So let's put the Porter one. 4200. So you see, this is a real API request happening, and they say we do deliver. This was actually pretty cool. We like live coded the heck out of this, and it does work. I was like, it worked. So this is how you can use a custom async validator. Really, really, really cool stuff, and to do something. And I think this is very practical because if you had a use case like this, the custom async validators, and you can have multiple of these async validators, right? Right. So any questions about this? Okay.
You want to only do the request if you have 8 characters. You can only do that validation inside the custom validator.
You only want to do a request if
you have 8 digits.
Yes. Okay. So you want to wait until they have up to 8 digits, right? I will tell you, it is doable, but it's actually one of the things that's one of the easy missing features of Reactive Forms. It's very doable. You can use you'd use RxJX, you like basically to delay it, but you cannot delay it outside. You have to do it before it gets to the form. It is a bit tricky, but it's one of the things that literally I talked to the person that built this and I'm like, this has to be the next version, right? And she's like, yes, she knows. I'm not gonna see her name before you go and look for her house. But like, it's one of the things that they want to make it a bit easier where you could just say, you know what, like to use RxJX more easily.
The custom validator, you can return always a promise, right? But then you can only say it's an error or it's not an error. Right?
Yes, you return undefined or an error.
You have a way to say ignore me for now.
Which is, yeah, so the way you'd want to do that is you'd want to delay how I would do that is I would delay the execution of the validator. So I would use like a debounce with RxJX. I would like say, okay, wait until this value is 8 characters. You can technically do that. There are a lot of ways, but it's not as straightforward as it should be is what I'm saying. And they know this. This is the one part, the one negative. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Okay. So we've covered these things here. And to get started today, you can go to my stack list and you get the demo links, and this link will be provided to you. You can go to the Angular guide as well. They have a lot of stuff on there. You can ask me a question on Twitter, really. Like, yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. My DMs are open. Yeah, well, this is a different case. If you want to learn in person, like we have been teaching people, we've just given a great 3-day class. Feel free to go to angularbootcamp.com and get in touch. And obrigado, GGG Porto. Right?
No more questions?
Yes.
What is the main difference between using Form Builder and new Form Group, for example?
Form Builder gives you a declarative way. It's much easier. With Form Group, it's very imperative. So you'd have to like create all your instances and then add them. So Live Form Builder just gives you like an object, just name with parameters.
Okay, but we can use that object that allows us to put form validators as well. I mean that one that you put to check if the passwords match. We can do it both ways.
Yes, you can do it both ways. In fact, when you're working with dynamic stuff, you'll be using the instance imperative. So you can add validators on the fly, remove validators on the fly, add controls on the fly, remove controls on the fly. In fact, you can even say, I know you're invalid, but I'm your maker. Be valid. Like you can do a lot of things. Yeah. Questions?
For example, you can Is it possible to have the form in this way forms are built, the reactive forms, binded to an entity of a class that you predefined on your application?
Like CSS class?
No, like an object that comes from an API call, and you and for example is a user object, and you have this object binded to the form object.
So you want to create a form, but you want to use some property that is coming from the server, right? Yes, absolutely, because it's just an array of objects. So if you can construct that object, regardless whether it's coming from the server and it has the correct things. However, it would not be easy to do things like the validators. You know, that cannot be part of data. So what you'd probably you would need is you get the data, right? And you'd most likely get the instance. So like you can do something like add control, and then you'd give it. But yes, absolutely, you can dynamically create and move around things 100%. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes. How do you reset the state of the form after you touch it? When you fill a form, you change the states of the input.
Yes.
After that, how do you reset the values?
Well, the values are being calculated by your actions. So like if you've touched a form, for example, right? You've touched it. That has already happened. But if you need to, for some reason, make it untouched, if you look at the abstract control, which I don't recommend, but if you look at the abstract control, Angular, I'm really struggling with this keyboard. No, nothing to be. So for example, if you look at like the abstract control, like one of the properties you can see apart from like the normal valid, invalid is you can see mark as touched, right? Yeah, you can do things like mark as touched, mark as pristine, mark as dirty. Like you can literally go ahead and control that. I don't know why you would need to do that because the whole point of touched is you want to know when the user is touched, but for whatever reason, you have the ability to mark it in some ways. And coming back to your question, sorry, your name, sir? Paulo, exactly. It's totally up to you to really use what's it called, and also relate to the last question of the lad behind you, where you can see some of the properties. What is your name, sir? Hui. Okay, you can see some of the properties that would be useful to you when you're dynamically. So if I got this from API, some data from API, I would come here and do like something like where is it? Oh no, this would be on the form group level. Sorry, form group, right? Group. So on the form group level, one of the things you can do is like add control. So you can add another control on the fly. Doesn't matter when you've created. This is most likely after you've already created the thing. So you can add it, or even if you haven't created, you come here, add, register new controls, remove controls. In fact, you can add a control, but tell the form not to calculate its new validity. Like maybe you just want to add something on the shadow. You can do things like that. It's really, really powerful API. Right. Any questions? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Arthur.
Pleasure having you here.
By the way, this could not have happened without Arthur. Like, there's a crazy story. I have never met him before. I just reached out like, do you want me to come piss your people off? And he was like, yeah, sure. And here we are. So major thanks to both of them, man. Like, really appreciate, man. Yeah.
And thank you for coming here. Always a pleasure.
No.
Everyone, thank you. I hope you enjoyed my browser. All my tabs are there. If you need anything, just hit me up.
Yeah, we should have seen his browsing history.
Yeah, I was a click away from being fired. So, thank you. You have beer in the back. If you need more, we have more beer. Please drink it. And it was a pleasure having you here. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sani. See you on the next Byte.
Yes.